Liam Porter, a man in his mid-50s, had lived in Maplewood for over a decade. He prided himself on being what he called the gatekeeper of the community. A stay-at-home husband with too much time on his hands, Liam took it upon himself to maintain the peace and order he believed Maplewood represented. He knew everyone on his block and kept a mental list of all the comings and goings of his neighbors. The comings of the wrong type, in particular, never escaped his eagle eye. It was during his morning walk that he noticed something unusual. A woman, a black woman dressed in casual yet well-fitting clothing, was walking toward one of the houses at the end of the cul-de-sac. Liam squinted his eyes, slowing his pace. He had never seen her before. Maplewood was a tight-knit community, and the residents were predominantly white. This woman, with her confident stride and easy demeanor, stood out to him like a sore thumb. She must be lost, Liam thought, or perhaps she's visiting someone. But the longer he watched, the more he grew suspicious. The woman didn't just pass by the houses. She walked up the driveway of one of the nicest homes in the community. The two-story brick-faced house with the sweeping porch and grand oak door that belonged to no one Liam recognized. His pace quickened as he hurried closer, determined to get a better look. The woman stopped at the front door, pulled out a key, and inserted it into the lock. Liam's eyes widened in shock. No one told him there were new neighbors moving in, and certainly not someone like her. He felt a wave of indignation rise inside him. How did this woman afford to live here? He knew his neighbors, their incomes, their families, their histories. There was no way someone like her belonged in Maplewood, especially in a home like that. He immediately whipped out his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed 911. "This is Liam Porter. I'm calling from Maplewood. There's a suspicious woman trying to break into a home on Oak Drive. Yes, she's black," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "I think she's trying to rob the place. Please send someone quickly." After hanging up, Liam stayed nearby, his eyes never leaving the house. He could see the woman moving around inside now, as though she owned the place. He huffed indignantly. This neighborhood is going downhill, he thought, shaking his head as he waited for the police to arrive. Liam's mind raced with all the possible scenarios. Was she part of a gang? A criminal trying to blend in by dressing well? Perhaps she had forced her way into the home somehow. The longer he thought about it, the more his anger simmered. Maplewood was supposed to be a safe, upper-class community, free from the kinds of people who might cause trouble. He wasn't about to let that change. 10 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house, lights flashing but sirens silent. Liam felt a smug sense of satisfaction wash over him as 2 officers, one male and one female, stepped out of the cars. He waved them over eagerly. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. She's inside right now," he said, pointing toward the house. "I saw her walk right in as if she owned the place, but I know for a fact that she doesn't live there. I've never seen her before." The male officer, Officer Johnson, nodded and thanked Liam for his vigilance. "We'll take it from here, sir," he said before turning toward the house. His partner, Officer Ramirez, glanced briefly at Liam, her expression neutral. As the officers approached the house, Liam couldn't help but follow at a distance, his curiosity piqued. He wanted to see how this played out, certain he'd be proven right. The officers knocked firmly on the door. After a moment, the door opened, and the woman Liam had been watching appeared, looking calm and completely unbothered. She was tall, well-built, and appeared to be in her early 40s, with a neatly trimmed afro and kind eyes that didn't match the image Liam had conjured of her. "Good morning, officers. Can I help you with something?" the woman asked, her tone polite but puzzled. "Good morning, ma'am," Officer Johnson began. "We received a report of suspicious activity at this residence. May we ask if you live here?" The woman raised an eyebrow, surprised but still calm. "Yes, I do live here. My name is Michelle Carter," she said, gesturing toward the inside of the house. "I just moved in a couple of weeks ago. Do you have any identification or proof of residence?" Officer Ramirez asked, her voice professional but not accusatory. "Of course," Michelle replied. "Just give me a moment." As Michelle turned to retrieve her ID, Liam's self-satisfied smirk faded slightly. He hadn't expected this level of confidence. People who didn't belong in neighborhoods like this didn't act so calm when the police showed up. He watched from his spot on the sidewalk, arms crossed, growing more frustrated by the second. A minute later, Michelle returned with her driver's license and a few papers. "Here's my ID, and this is a copy of the deed to the house," she said, handing them to Officer Johnson, who examined them carefully. As the officer looked over the documents, something remarkable happened. Michelle's demeanor remained completely unshaken. In fact, she even offered a small smile. Liam's stomach twisted in discomfort. Officer Johnson handed the papers back and nodded. "Everything checks out, Miss Carter. Sorry to have disturbed you." "No problem," Michelle replied. "I figured something like this might happen when I moved in." Liam, still watching from a distance, couldn't believe his ears. He took a few steps forward, indignant, unwilling to let this end without confronting the woman directly. "Wait just a minute," he called out, his voice sharp. "There's no way you live here. I've lived in this neighborhood for 10 years, and I know who's supposed to live in these homes. You can't just walk in and pretend to own the place." Officer Ramirez shot Liam a look, but Michelle was the one who responded. "Sir," Michelle began, keeping her voice calm and measured, "I'm not pretending to live here. I do live here. I bought this house 2 weeks ago." Liam shook his head, his face reddening. "You must have lied or tricked someone. People like you don't just buy houses in places like this." The officer stiffened at the comment, and even Officer Ramirez couldn't hide her discomfort. Michelle, however, didn't lose her composure. "Actually," Michelle said, folding her arms and meeting Liam's gaze, "I didn't just buy this house. I own all the houses in Maplewood." There was a stunned silence. Liam's mouth fell open in shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. The officers exchanged surprised glances. "What?" Liam stammered. "That's impossible." Michelle smiled, but it wasn't a mocking smile. It was one of quiet patience. "I'm a real estate developer. I purchased Maplewood as part of a larger investment portfolio a few years ago. I oversee all the properties in this community, including the one you're living in." Liam's legs felt weak. He opened his mouth to speak, but found that no words would come out. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. This woman, the one he had called the cops on, was not just his neighbor, but the owner of his home and the entire community. All the pride he had taken in being the gatekeeper of the neighborhood evaporated in an instant. Officer Johnson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. Sorry again for the trouble, Miss Carter. We'll let you get back to your day." Michelle nodded. "Thank you, officers. No hard feelings." She then turned to Liam, her expression softening. "Sir, I understand that you're protective of your neighborhood, but maybe next time, get to know someone before assuming the worst. We all live here together, and this community is better when we support each other." Liam could barely process her words. His face burned with shame and embarrassment, and he quickly turned away, muttering something under his breath about a misunderstanding. He hurried back down the sidewalk, avoiding eye contact with anyone as he made his way back to his house. The reality of his actions weighed heavily on him. He had thought of himself as a protector of Maplewood, but in truth, he had become a prisoner of his own narrow-mindedness. He had called the police on a woman who not only belonged in the neighborhood, but who also had more right to be there than he ever had. Michelle watched him retreat for a moment before shaking her head and closing her front door. She had encountered people like Liam before, people who judged based on appearances and assumptions. It never got easier, but she had learned to navigate the world with grace and resilience. She would continue to live in Maplewood, hoping that in time, the community would come to understand that their differences made them stronger, not weaker. As Liam closed his own front door behind him, he stood still for a moment. The quiet of his pristine home suddenly felt stifling. He thought about the woman he had just tried to drive out of the neighborhood and how, in doing so, he had exposed the ugliest parts of himself. In the days that followed, Liam avoided Michelle whenever he saw her around the neighborhood, but he couldn't shake the shame he felt. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the gatekeeper of Maplewood. Instead, he felt like a stranger in his own home. And maybe, he thought, that was exactly what he deserved.